Storyboard, how can brands speak to consumers through the apps they use? We have Brian Wong, founder and CEO KIIP, answering this for us. We caught up with him at the recently held Zee Melt in Delhi. At the same event, we also caught up with Ethan Merrill, founder Zee Melt Reviews, and spoke to him about what makes him swear. And Mondelez enters the light-colored cream cookie segment with Oreo Gold. On today's notice board, we get to see the new TVC for this brand. Hello and welcome to Storyboard. This is Shibani Kharat. In an era where we are so dependent on the apps that we have on our smartphones, KIIP is an offering that attempts to understand how brands connect with consumers through a moment-based rewards platform. They also target significant moments in apps people use every day. This approach could certainly help create meaningful engagements involving brands, developers and advertisers. Storyboard editor Anant Rangaswamy speaks to Brian Wong, founder and CEO KIIP, on the sidelines of Zee Melt and asks him why should brands talk to his organization. Let's hear what he has to say.
Brian, thank you for talking to CNBC TV 18.
Thank you for having me.
So, to begin with, tell us why should brands talk to you?
I think when they're looking at mobile and being able to engage with consumers in a better way, that's why they should be talking to us. I think historically the options you have in front of you when you want to do advertising or brand engagement on mobile is quite limited and sometimes quite disruptive.
Right. Now, as a category, marketers are sort of resistant to doing things on mobile or through SMS or stuff, because one, the results sometimes are quite dodgy, the metrics are hazy. So tell me why somebody, say, from Mondelez in Bombay should talk to you.
I think it is exactly what I was mentioning, which was their options were quite limited earlier, and I think it requires a disruptor, someone who's creating an entirely different new concept, right? If you look at the struggle in the past, it's been, okay, we know all these metrics in old media and we're going to try to port them over, right? And It's a natural human thing to do, and it's a way to just make it simpler. But then you realize that mobile is very different, and so there was no very different model to begin with in the first place, so they try to do all these things to port things over, and that's the challenges that they're facing. Because in order to see the equivalent of a GRP or a TRP or a CPM from desktop to print to mobile is very, very hard, and that's the complaints you're seeing. We simply said, why not just look at mobile as an entirely different category of engagement and look at it from in just advertising to someone. Instead, you can reward them.
Right.
And of course, with KIIP, the idea is why not in these moments when people are engaging with their apps, when they're doing things on a daily basis, that a brand can just reward you. So you could finish running in your running app, and then a water brand or a fitness brand can then reward you in that moment in time.
Right.
And so I think when we changed that, and not only did we change the way that we looked at the engagement, we also changed the metrics and we changed the tracking. I know people will look at that and say, why would you be so different? It's going to make you difficult to work with. But then the long game...
why are you so different? Because you're so difficult to work with?
No, it's in the long game what happens is people realize that they want to have better interactions with their consumers on mobile devices. And if you see the results, for example, we see on average 15% of the consumers that we show a reward to engage with it. Right? 15% engagement rate on any advertising method is unheard of, right? And so when you start to see these types of results, people
that's again porting old metrics to new metrics.
No, this is using an engagement rate, which I think is something that is reminiscent of an old metric, but is indicative of the new way that we're encouraging brands to look at mobile and how consumers should interact.
Yeah. Isn't it limited, the kind of stuff you can do in terms of demographics? For example, younger people are more likely to be sort of engaged with you than older people.
So I think we've transcended the age a conversation by really pointing out the dynamic of what we call the connected generation.
Right.
And the connected generation is, simply put, anyone that has a smartphone and is used to a world that is always online. Right? So a lot of what we see as the habits of the older or the younger may be an offline individual versus an online individual. For example, and I like to use my parents as a good indicator of this. My mom and dad both have iPads, smartwatches, iPhones. Their habits are very similar to someone who might be considered younger. But because they're connected, they are now used to these services and their habits are in that same category. So when we talk to marketers, we say think about it as a connected generation, not just an age difference, because you can always have different people who have different habits, but as long as they're connected, they will basically behave or demand the same type of interaction with their mobile devices and the services that those mobile devices can provide.
So share a bit about your journey. Tell me about the first few big brands which embraced you.
So our first few customers actually came from our investors. Right. So when you're a young company, you bring on investors and advisors that like you and like your product, and then they bet on you. Right. So the former CMO of Vitamin Water is one of our investors, and Vitamin Water was our first customer. Right. And then we had a chip brand, or a crisps brand, as you call it here, called Pop Chips.
No, we call it chips.
Oh, you call chips too. Okay, great.
Chips,
so they also were our customers as well. So our first few customers were kind of beverage, FMCG, retail, QSR, and that continues to be the case. You know, in the past year, our biggest
Who are
customers,
the biggest customers now?
Yeah, past year, our biggest customers were Unilever, J&J, Nestle, General Mills, P&G. I mean, these are all very FMCG driven. On the retail side, we work a lot with financial institutions. So this could be banks. This could even be a Walgreens or 7-Eleven. And I think the reason why we're working well with these companies is because they seek differentiation. And they seek a way to differentiate through the way they communicate. And I think when you look at it, those are the brands that are willing to be a bit more creative with how they look at the models that they do, the interaction with on a device such as your smartphone.
So in a country like India, have you explored India from a business perspective at all?
So that's what this trip is for. And
right.
You know, I believe India has a few. So first of all, when you look at our model, we have 5,000 apps that have our technology integrated into it. Right. This is where we get our traffic. So globally, we have about 150 million users. Within India, we already have 7 million active users. And this is just from the apps that happen to have users that downloaded the app in India. Right. The reason why I mention India and why I'm so excited about the market is that it's one of the only countries that we've seen 50-60% smartphone growth in the past year within just our apps. And you have a few trends working in its favor. Disposable income is rising. Data costs are lowering. Smartphone costs are lowering. All of these are pointing to potential explosion in media consumption and app usage within Indian consumers, not only in urban India, but in rural India, which means a huge opportunity for advertising to expand beyond the market that it is today, which is what? You know, Google, Facebook, Times Internet. In Mobi, there's a handful of players, but there's a lot more opportunities. When you look at huge Asian populations, sometimes these populations have companies that are basically like the Google equivalent of that country. China has Tencent. Korea has, you know, KakaoTalk. India doesn't have the equivalent of like a Tencent that's Indian-born. So I believe that because of these reasons, there's still a very large opportunity for an internet entry or even a mobile entry that could become very large and have a lot of impact on the Indian consumer.
So have you met any Indian brands this trip?
So yeah, so just yesterday I met with the Airtel folks and then with the Times Internet folks. Right. And I'm actually very impressed with the way that they've built their digital products, the way they look at the Indian mobile consumer. And I think it's learning a lot of things that are new services that are unique to India. For example, things like Paytm. Right. You know, this is not a service that has an equivalent anywhere else in the world.
Absolutely.
And when you start to understand those, you begin to realize the psyche of the Indian consumer. And then realizing, for example, that yes, the Indian consumer is very value-driven. And of course, a model that might be rewards-driven, like ours, potentially has a lot of opportunity here, which is why I'm so excited about this market.
Right. So finally, the last question. If you had to make an elevator pitch to the head of Unilever India, what would you tell him about using you?
So a lot of the way that advertising used to play out was content consumption, right? You buy an ad in a magazine or on TV because you're aligning to that content. If you watch a Bollywood thing, then you put the ad there and it's great. Our whole thing is you want to be where the consumer is spending time. And many of them are spending their time on their mobile devices today. And you need to know the mobile behaviors, the mobile habits, and then be able to target it beyond what you're seeing from the traditional media. And in fact, a lot of your youth, a lot of the folks that are buying new devices are only buying smartphones and only buying tablets. And guess what? There's no such thing as a cookie on these devices.
Right.
So the way they used to target folks on the desktop web, that doesn't even exist with the droves of the devices that are being sold in the new generations that are buying these devices. Right. So there's a big, it's not just a luxury, it's a must to be able to respectfully interact with their consumers on their mobile devices.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, and all the best for your forays into India.
Thank you.
It is time for us to take a short break. After this break, we catch up with a man who's known to swear and cuss. We speak to Ethan Merrill, founder Zee Melt Reviews, and talk to him why and how is he such a huge sensation.